Welcome to In-Silico Trials Real Impact, the In-Silico UK podcast that's revolutionizing the way we think about medical innovation. I'm Professor Alejandro Frangi from the University of Manchester, and I'll be your guide through this fascinating world of In-Silico technologies. In each episode, we'll dive into cutting-edge research and groundbreaking news that are shaping the future of medical product development and regulation. From computational modeling to simulated clinical trials, we are exploring how digital approaches are transforming healthcare, making it safer, more efficient, more equitable, and incredibly precise. So, whether you're a researcher, regulator, a member of the public, or a patient representative, or simply curious about the future of medicine, tune in as we unravel the complex world of in-silico methods and their real-world impact. Get ready to discover how computer-simulated trials are leading to very real breakthroughs in patient care. In-Silico Trials, Real Impact, where algorithms and data are saving lives. Let's begin.
Okay, so get this today. We are diving into the future of medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And trust me, it is way cooler than any sci-fi movie out there.
Okay.
We're talking virtual trials in medical imaging.
Wow.
And let me tell you, you are going to be dropping some serious knowledge bombs after this deep dive.
I'm excited.
I know, right? It is really cool stuff.
Yeah.
So have you ever wished for a time machine?
Who hasn't, right?
Well, today we're diving into a paper
Okay.
that might just make you think that time travel is real.
All right.
It's by a body and their team, and it's basically the rule book for this whole new world
Gotcha.
of virtual trials, especially in medical imaging.
Right.
They lay out how it all works, the hurdles, the huge potential, and just everything you need to know about virtual trials.
Yeah. And you know what's really interesting about this paper?
What's that?
It's not just, some pie in the sky, like, oh, maybe this will happen someday kind of thing.
Right.
It really highlights how these virtual trials can, actually right now revolutionize how we design imaging technology and optimize it before it even gets near a patient.
So what you're saying is no more waiting years for results.
Exactly.
Faster, cheaper, and safer.
Yes.
Okay, you've got to tell me more because I'm hooked.
Okay, so picture this.
Okay.
It all starts with something called digital twins.
Digital twins.
Digital twins, and basically what that means is incredibly detailed virtual replicas of everything.
Okay.
We're talking human anatomy, diseases, different body parts, you name it.
Wow.
And they're able to simulate it all.
Wait, so hold up for a second because I need to wrap my head around this.
Sure.
We're talking about digital twins of actual humans.
Yes.
That sounds like something straight out of a movie.
It does sound very futuristic.
Yeah.
But this is the core of this whole technology, right? We're talking virtual replicas of, human beings designed with incredible detail that actually reflect the complexities of the real human body.
Okay, so how detailed are we talking? Give me an example.
So imagine a digital twin for different ages,
Okay.
for different body types, and even for people who have specific diseases.
Wow. So we can actually simulate imaging procedures on these digital twins.
You got it.
Is that what makes these virtual trials so powerful?
That's a huge part of it, yeah. So imagine, you're trying to test out a new imaging technique.
Right.
You can do it all in this virtual environment.
Oh.
Yeah.
You can adjust settings. You can see how it might impact diagnosis and treatment. And you don't have to worry about any risks to actual real-life patients.
Right, because it's all virtual.
Exactly. And the paper really stresses just how valuable this is for testing new technologies and refining them very, very quickly.
So it's like a medical imaging playground.
It kind of is.
Where you can test out all these radical new ideas without any real-world consequences.
Exactly.
It's a safe space to experiment.
Okay, so give me an example, because I always like to think about things in concrete terms.
Let's say a team of researchers is developing a new breast imaging technology, something that's totally revolutionary.
Right.
How would they use this digital twin thing to their advantage?
Well, they could create a virtual trial with, say, a diverse group of these digital twins, and they could simulate different things like breast densities or potential issues that could come up and see how the technology performs.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, so this has already blown my mind,
Good.
but I have to ask,
Yeah.
because it's all digital.
Right.
These trials can be run way faster and cheaper than the traditional kind.
Right. You're catching on quickly.
Well,
That's exactly right. That's one of the biggest advantages of virtual trials.
so no more waiting years to see results from some of these trials.
Exactly, because we all know that traditional clinical trials they can be so long.
Oh, tell me about it.
They're very expensive. And, a lot of that comes down to patient recruitment, collecting data, all of that.
Right, all the logistics.
Yeah.
But with virtual trials, that's all streamlined, right?
Yes.
Okay, this all sounds incredible.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to ask, how do we actually know that these digital twins are accurate?
Right.
Like, it can't just be some, fancy computer graphic.
For $1 million question.
Right.
And honestly, that's something that the paper spends a lot of time on, and that's the whole concept of credibility.
Okay. Yeah, because we can't just rely on something that looks cool, right?
Yeah.
It has to actually work.
Exactly. These digital twins, they have to go through some serious testing.
Right.
To make sure that they really do reflect reality.
So are we talking about, comparing, a simulated X-ray of a 3D printed bone
You got it.
to a real X-ray?
Yes.
That level of detail.
That level of detail.
Wow.
So they'll actually 3D print a bone, X-ray it, and then they'll compare it to a virtual X-ray of its digital twin.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and you know what they're even using now? They're using AI
to
check this.
So it's like AI, checking AI. That's very meta.
It is very meta.
Okay.
But it helps to make sure that these simulations are the real deal.
Okay, so we've got these hyper-realistic digital twins.
Right.
We're running these really sophisticated simulations.
Yes.
But how do we take all of this and actually use it to answer those big medical questions?
And that's where things get really interesting, right?
Okay.
Because the paper really stresses that every virtual trial, it needs to have a very clear objective.
Okay.
A question, basically, that's driving the whole process.
Mhm.
So it's not just about, creating a simulation just because you can.
Right. It's got to have a purpose.
Yeah, you want to make sure that you're using these really powerful tools to find answers that have a real impact in the real world.
Give me an example.
Okay.
Say I'm a researcher, and I want to see if this new type of CT scan can, detect lung cancer way earlier than existing methods.
Okay, perfect example. So your virtual trial, it would use these digital twins again.
Okay.
But this time you'd want to represent different stages of lung cancer.
Okay, so from very early
From very early
or more advanced cases.
to more advanced, yeah.
Okay.
And then you would simulate this new CT scan on those digital twins and compare the results to simulations of the traditional CT scan.
And because it's such a controlled environment,
Yes.
we can be sure that any differences we see are because of the new technology.
Yes.
And not because of variations in the patients or other factors that could skew the results.
Exactly. And that level of control that you have with a virtual trial, that's really what makes it a game changer.
Wow.
Because you're minimizing bias and you're getting a much clearer understanding of what that new technology can really do.
That's revolutionary.
It's very exciting.
Okay, so this is amazing,
Mm-hmm.
but it can't all be smooth sailing.
Yeah.
Right? There have to be some roadblocks, some challenges.
Of course.
What are those challenges?
So one of the biggest ones right now is accessibility.
Accessibility. Okay.
Because right now, all these incredible tools, they're often kind of stuck in these research labs, hidden behind all this complex code
Yeah.
and proprietary data.
Right. So it's not readily available to everyone.
Exactly. And this paper, they really push for a more open and collaborative approach.
So democratizing this technology,
Yeah,
making it so that more researchers can get their hands on it.
exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
Because imagine a world where you have these open source platforms,
Okay.
where you have standardized formats, almost like an app store for virtual trials.
Oh, an app store for medical breakthroughs.
Exactly.
I am here for it.
This wouldn't just speed up research, it would actually unlock the full potential of virtual trials for everyone.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Okay, but I'm guessing accessibility is not the only challenge.
you're right.
What else is there?
Well, accessibility is a big one.
Right.
But there's another challenge that the paper really highlights, and it's making sure that these trials, they actually reflect the incredible diversity
Right.
of the patients who are going to benefit from them.
Okay, so it's not enough to have a handful of digital twins
Right.
and call it a day, right?
Exactly.
We need to consider age, ethnicity, body type, everything, right?
All the things that make us unique.
Because otherwise, it's not going to be as effective.
Exactly.
So how do we do that?
Well, it really comes down to the data that's
Okay.
used to create these digital twins in the first place, right?
Mhm.
So researchers, they need access to large, diverse data sets
Makes sense.
that really encompass, the amazing range of human variation.
Yeah, and that's got to be a challenge, right?
That is a huge challenge.
Because, like, how do you even begin to collect that much data?
Right, and you have to think about privacy.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Data security, all of that.
Right, so it's not just a technological challenge, it's also an ethical one.
It's both.
Wow.
And that kind of leads into another really important aspect that the paper talks about, which is this idea of reproducibility.
Reproducibility, okay.
So we've got these detailed digital twins. We're running these sophisticated simulations. But how do we make sure that, say, another researcher,
Right.
maybe on the other side of the world, can actually take our work and reproduce it?
Right, because that's a cornerstone of science, right?
Exactly, because for any scientific finding to be considered reliable,
Right.
trustworthy, you need to be able to reproduce it.
Yep.
And virtual trials are no different.
Okay.
So the paper really stresses things like, detailed documentation, clear methodologies, standardized protocols.
So you're saying we need to create a common language
Yes.
for virtual trials.
Yes, exactly.
And that everyone's on the same page.
Exactly.
And they can understand each other's work.
Yes. And the paper even talks about using standardized data formats, like the ones that are already being used for traditional clinical trials.
So kind of piggybacking on what's already there.
Yeah, exactly. And that would make it so much easier for researchers to share data, to compare results, and ultimately to build on each other's work.
Right, because science is a team sport.
Yeah.
It's not about working in isolation.
Exactly. And that's really the key.
Collaboration.
Collaboration. Yeah, this technology, it has so much potential.
It really does.
But we're only going to be able to unlock that potential if we're all on the same page.
Working together,
breaking down those silos.
So instead of these isolated labs all working independently, it's more like this global network of researchers.
Yes.
All collaborating in this shared virtual space.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
And it's all focused on making things better for patients.
Okay, so we've talked about the how, the why, but what about the what?
The what?
Like, what are some specific examples of how virtual trials are being used in medical imaging?
So one of the beauties of virtual trials is just how versatile they are. So they can really be applied across a huge range of imaging modalities, and we can use them to answer so many different clinical questions.
So it's not just about one type of imaging or one specific disease.
No, not at all.
It's really about using this, like, toolkit to tackle all sorts of medical challenges.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so give me some specifics. Like, where are we seeing those aha moments?
So one area where virtual trials are already making a big difference is in figuring out how to optimize radiation dose for CT scans.
Oh, that's huge.
Right.
Because that's something we're always trying to, like, balance, right? How do we get the clearest image possible to make sure that we're not missing anything, but also minimize the risk?
Exactly. And with virtual trials, we can actually start to experiment with different CT scan parameters, different dose levels, and we can see how that actually affects image quality and how accurate the diagnosis is. Wow.
And we can do all that in the virtual world.
Right. Before we even bring a real person in.
Before we expose a patient to any radiation.
That's incredible.
It's like having a radiation-free testing ground.
I love that. A radiation-free testing ground.
Yes.
For CT protocols.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
And this approach can be used for other imaging techniques as well.
Okay, like what?
So, for example, the paper talks about using these virtual trials to evaluate new ultrasound technologies.
Okay.
Especially for things like cardiovascular imaging.
Okay, where you really need to be able to see the blood flow.
Exactly. You need to be able to see how the blood is flowing through the heart.
And so could we potentially use virtual trials to personalize those settings?
Yes.
Like for each patient.
Exactly.
Based on their anatomy.
Precisely.
And the information that we need.
That's the idea.
Wow. So we're talking about taking personalized medicine to a whole new level here.
Absolutely.
It's like personalized imaging.
Personalized imaging, yeah.
I love it. It's really about giving those clinicians a superpower.
Right.
Where they can fine-tune the imaging techniques.
To get the best possible outcome.
To give the best possible care to each individual patient.
That's incredible.
And it's not just about the technology itself either, because the paper also talks about using virtual trials to actually study human perception and decision-making when it comes to medical imaging.
So, wait, hold on. We're using virtual reality to study how humans interpret virtual reality.
In a way, yes.
Okay, now we're getting really meta.
It's very meta, but it's really important because, at the end of the day, even with the most amazing advanced imaging technology, it's only as good as the human who's actually interpreting those images.
Right, because a human has to make a decision based on that information.
Exactly.
So how do we use virtual trials to study that?
So by modeling these human factors in the virtual environment, we can actually start to, develop better training programs for those clinicians.
Yep.
We can come up with new decision support tools, and we can even develop new imaging technologies that are specifically designed to be easily interpreted by the human brain.
So we're taking into account how our brains actually work.
Exactly.
And designing the technology around that.
Yes, because if we can make it easier for radiologists to read those images, we can reduce errors.
Okay.
And we can improve diagnosis, which ultimately means better outcomes for patients.
It's like we're taking this 360-degree approach.
I like that, a 360-degree approach.
To medical imaging.
Yeah.
Where we're not just considering the technology, but we're also thinking about the human element.
The human at the center of it all.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this paper so insightful, because it doesn't just focus on the technical details.
Right.
It really looks at those bigger implications of virtual trials.
Right. And how it's going to change things for the patients.
Exactly.
It's exciting.
It really is an exciting time.
We're on the verge of a medical imaging revolution.
We are.
It sounds like.
And virtual trials are really at the forefront of that.
It's incredible.
But, the authors also acknowledge that we are still early on.
Right. This is still a relatively new technology.
Exactly. And they really see this paper as a call to action for everyone, for researchers, for regulators, for industry leaders to really work together to figure out how we can overcome those remaining challenges and how we can really bring the power of these virtual trials to everyone.
I love that. It's such a great point.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to get caught up in the excitement of the technology.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's really about the people.
Yes.
It's about the patients.
It's about improving patient lives.
And it sounds like virtual trials have the potential to do just that.
They really do.
Okay, so we've talked about the how, the why, the what. But before we wrap up, I want to touch on the who.
Okay.
Who are the people driving this revolution?
That's a great question. It's definitely not a one-person show.
Right.
The authors really emphasize that it takes a really diverse team to move this whole thing forward.
Makes sense.
So we're talking researchers, medical physicists, software developers, you even have the regulatory bodies. They all have a role to play.
So it's like a whole new area of expertise is springing up around this.
Absolutely.
That's really cool.
And one of the things that the authors talk about is how important it is for all these different groups to get out of their bubbles a little bit.
Okay, so more collaboration?
More collaboration, more sharing ideas, and a real sense of teamwork.
I love that.
Because that's how you really drive innovation.
Absolutely. And you know who we can't forget about in all of this?
The patients.
The patients.
Of course.
At the end of the day,
they're the ones who benefit.
They're the ones who benefit the most.
Exactly. And this paper actually makes a really good point about how important it is to involve patients every step of the way.
Okay, so from the beginning.
From the very beginning. So even when you're just designing the virtual trials, you want to be getting input from patients.
So talking to patient advocacy groups.
Exactly. And making sure that the questions that these trials are trying to answer are the questions that really matter.
To the people who are actually living with these conditions.
Exactly. Because it's not enough to just build a cool technology.
Right. It has to have real world impact.
That has to actually make a difference.
Yeah, it has to improve people's lives.
Exactly. And that's what's so rewarding about this field.
I bet.
It's science with a purpose.
I love that, science with a purpose.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
But as we wrap things up, what's the one thing you want our listener to walk away with today?
I want them to think about the power of these virtual trials. Okay, the next time you hear about a new imaging technique, or maybe you're even going in for an X-ray, just take a moment and think about this technology because it really does have the potential.
It's revolutionary.
It is revolutionary to make things faster, safer, and just all around better for patients.
Well said. I love that.
It's an exciting time to be paying attention.
Absolutely. We are on the verge of a medical imaging revolution.
We are.
And it sounds like virtual trials are leading the charge.
They really are.
Who knows what we'll see in the years to come?
The possibilities are endless.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive.
It has.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's always a pleasure to be here.
It's always fascinating to chat with you.
Likewise.
And to our listener, thanks for diving in with us.
Yes, thank you.
Keep those brains engaged, keep asking those questions, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.